kind of felt like all of the fears that we had about this pregnancy were kind of coming to life at that moment. And it was really, really scary that it was both of our lives that were on the line because of this information. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. If you are new here, I would absolutely love it if you subscribe to my channel. Join the family. We have such an incredible community that we are building right now, and I would absolutely love for you to be a part of it. If you are a new or returning viewer, you know how much I love you. I am so incredibly grateful for you. I know to you it may not seem like much, but I am so incredibly grateful for every single person who follows my journey with my little baby boy, who is here to hear about my incredible little girl, and just enjoys watching my family and being on this journey with us. So thank you so much for being here. I genuinely love you so much and I'm so appreciative. Today's video is so incredibly special. I am so excited to be sitting down to tell you guys all about the absolute queen of my heart, my little precious baby girl, Blakely. I am already getting emotional. You guys know, like, I am an emotional wreck on this channel, but it is because I am so incredibly passionate about my children, and Blakely is another one of my little miracles. That little girl was meant to be mine. I really truly believe that we have multiple soulmates in this life, and Blakely is one of my soulmates. I have felt her since I was a teenager, and I absolutely knew that she was going to come to my family, and I'm so grateful that she did. So I don't want to make this intro too long, but I am going to be telling you guys about how I knew that I was absolutely supposed to get pregnant with her, when I knew that I was sure on a timeline and that it was urgent for me to get pregnant with her, and I am going to be telling you all about my pregnancy. It was extremely traumatic, very, very scary. I did experience a lot of PTSD, but I also had a lot of complications with my pregnancy with Miss Blakely, and that was very, very scary because she was my second baby, so I knew how much I was going to love her because I knew how much I love Beckham. I'm going to be giving you guys all of those details, so let's go ahead and just jump right into it. After I had Beckham, as you guys guessed and commented and questioned, I had some severe PTSD with the thought of having another baby. I was absolutely naive to the fact that pregnancies could have complications. Of course, that's totally common knowledge, but you genuinely never think it's gonna happen to you. You think that you're going to have a totally normal birth story. Yes, I think all women are a little bit nervous about labor when they're having their first baby and just have those normal fears that are associated with carrying a child to term. But for me, when I got pregnant with Beckham, I had no idea that I could end up in the situation that I did. And so going into my pregnancy with Blakely, I was absolutely terrified. When I started to have these feelings and promptings that I knew another baby was supposed to join our family, I was very, very nervous. I wanted to make sure that I was 100% positive that it was the correct time. And so I really pushed back with God. I questioned him. I asked him why I needed to have a baby so quickly because I was feeling pretty overwhelmed and I had just been through so much trauma. So just to give you guys an idea of a timeline, Beckham was born in June of 2019, and then he came home in September of 2019, and then I knew that another precious little baby was supposed to join our family in December. I had only had our precious little Beckham home for a total of 3 months, and those 3 months were obviously insane. Beckham was on oxygen, a monitor, he was going to the hospital multiple times a week, and I was just adjusting to having this new beautiful baby. I was so incredibly in love with him. Obviously I still am, but I just really felt strongly like I am supposed to have another baby. Like, God is telling me to get pregnant. And of course, Hunter was very, very terrified to have another baby. That was something that we really, really had to work through together to come to the conclusion that we did want to move forward with another pregnancy, or at least try to, if we would be, you know, blessed enough to be able to conceive. And so as I said, before I made that final decision, I did give God some pushback. And so I was actually driving down the road in my car one day, and I was talking out loud to God, and I just asked him, you know, why do you want me to have another baby right now? Can't I have another baby in a year? And immediately, just as clear as you are hearing my voice right now, the thought came into my mind that just said, Rachel, this baby will aid Beckham for the rest of his life, and it is vital that you have this baby now. I knew that they were supposed to be close in age because of that prompting. I knew that because of the Spirit entering my mind and just that thought that I had that was so incredibly strong, that I knew came from God, that that little baby, whether it was a boy or a girl, was going to really, really aid Beckham in his development, was going to be a helpmeet to him. And I knew that that baby missed Beckham. I knew that Beckham missed that baby. I knew that they were connected to one another. And I had a really special experience where in my mind, I just envisioned and saw those two babies together and just knew that I had another one and that it was time for them to join our family. I went home and of course I needed to discuss this with Hunter, and he knew that I had been feeling these really intense promptings to bring another baby into our family, but we were, you know, discussing things because it wasn't an easy decision to come to. We had a lot of things to consider. We obviously didn't know what the future looked like for Beckham because we knew that he may be very slow in development. We actually did not know at this point that he had cerebral palsy. This was in December when I was feeling these promptings very intensely. However, Hunter has always been very, very supportive of any promptings that I get from God, and he really encouraged me to keep talking to him and keep asking him. And so we continued to discuss it for a few more weeks because we had a few more weeks until my fertile window where we would even be able to start trying for the first time. And it was in that few weeks that we found out that Beckham was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and that was just a further prompting to me that everything I was feeling was correct, that this baby was supposed to come to us right now, and that this baby would be very close developmentally with Beckham in really vital times of Beckham's life. I knew that this child was going to be just as special as Beckham, and I knew it. I knew it in my soul. I know that there are so many mothers watching this. You are connected to your babies before they come to you. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I'm so grateful that I had that experience. Hunter and I started to try to get pregnant in January, and we were blessed enough to find out that we were pregnant on February 17th with our beautiful little Blakely. And I, of course, didn't know the gender. And so when we found out that it was a little girl, I was just ecstatic. And although I was so incredibly excited, of course, the fear kind of started to set in. I realized immediately that I was so incredibly in love with this little girl. I was so attached to her already. I had really felt her for a really long time, and I always really felt like I would have a daughter. I knew her name since I was a teenager, and Hunter and I talked about Blakely literally from the time we had gotten married. And so the connection with her was so incredibly instant, and I think that it is easier, in my personal opinion, for a mother to connect to her second pregnancy because you've already had a little baby. You know what that life is inside of you. You know how special and beautiful that fetus is, and you know what that baby is going to mean to you. And so I was just so incredibly in love with her already. And the fear kind of started to set in, like, what if I have another premature child? What if something happens to her? I felt so vulnerable again. And I was still healing. And I, of course, was still healing from the trauma that I was still working through with Beckham. And I was also working through the emotions of finding out that he had cerebral palsy at that time. So, of course, my emotions were all over the place, throwing like regular pregnancy hormones in there. And I was doing everything that I could just to be faithful and hopeful. And I just thought, you know, God wouldn't have told me so distinctly to have another baby. And a really important purpose and mission for this baby is to specifically play a very important role in Beckham's life if I wasn't going to get to keep this baby. And I was trying to have that faith and not mourn the loss of anything that hadn't happened yet. As the pregnancy progressed, we were fortunate enough not to have any bleeding or anything that caused any concern in the first trimester. Everything was going really smoothly, and I was just getting more and more excited. I did have quite a bit of PTSD in the beginning, and so I just made sure to really make sure that I was communicating that mostly with my husband and my parents. They were very, very comforting to me and constantly reminding me to try and look at this pregnancy through a spiritual lens. You guys know how important that is to me. And I also had an incredible OB who was taking very good care of me, that knew my history with Beckham. I can't even express how grateful I am for the medical field. I can honestly say we have had the best doctors. We are so blessed. Like, I just feel so incredibly grateful for every single person who chooses to go into a line of work in the medical field. You have no idea the lives that you are blessing. You may see it to some extent, but I could literally never show enough gratitude to my OB, the people who delivered both of my babies, the NICU nurses who took care of my son and saved his life multiple times. There are just so many people that I owe mine and my family's life to. It's incredible. So I had a really, really wonderful OB, and him in combination with my parents, my husband, my good friends, I just felt like I was able to live with and overcome this fear. Before we knew it, our 20-week anatomy scan was due to be done. And so we went to our 20-week anatomy scan, and it felt just like that day we were skipping into the hospital before we found out Beckham had cerebral palsy. We just really didn't understand what that appointment entailed. We only had one anatomy scan prior to this, and that was with Beckham, and his anatomy came back perfect. And again, it's one of those things where, like, you know that the anatomy scan is very scary and hard for some people, but you just don't believe it's gonna happen to you until it does. So we went into that anatomy scan feeling very hopeful, just excited. I remember just thinking like, oh, I get to see my little girl, I get to see all of her fingers and toes. This is gonna be so incredibly exciting. And it was. And then towards the end of the anatomy scan, the ultrasound tech said the baby looks absolutely perfect, things look wonderful, but I do have a slight concern about where your placenta is. So typically your placenta will grow in the back of your uterus and towards the top. And she was explaining to me that my placenta had grown and attached to the bottom of my uterus, and it was in the front. And the reason this was so concerning was because I had scar tissue from my previous C-section with Beckham. She told me that it was really important that I go see a specialist just to check my placenta, check the placement, and see if there was any growth into that scar tissue. And so I had been through, of course, so much in the previous months, and I was pretty bold, and I just said, okay, so what if it has grown into my scar tissue? Like, what's the worst case scenario? And she, I could tell, became a little bit uncomfortable, as I'm sure any of us would. And she was being very soft and gentle and wonderful with me. And, you know, she just said, I don't want to say anything to scare you. You know, I can't see what these specialists are going to be able to see. So I would love if you just went and saw them and they could give you more detail on exactly what's going on inside of your body. But, you know, there is a chance that if it has grown into your scar tissue, that you may need to have a hysterectomy and you may be forced into a C-section. Well, when I heard this information, I thought, okay, we don't know yet. Like, we don't know what the situation is with my placenta. I know from everything that I've just experienced that I am not going to mourn something that has not happened yet. So I left that appointment, and Hunter was definitely more affected than I was. I was nervous, but I thought everything's perfect with the baby. I don't know what's going on with my body yet, but if everything is perfect with the baby, that is literally the only thing that I care about. And of course, my sweet husband is going, excuse me, there are two of you that I have to worry about, and I'm so grateful everything is okay with Blakely, but I am just as concerned if everything is not perfectly okay with you. And he was very, very nervous, and he was struggling until we went and saw that specialist. And so we went into a specific MFM clinic. That stands for maternal fetal medicine. And that is where any woman with a high risk situation will go. And so I went into that appointment, and unfortunately it was during the height of lockdown during the pandemic. And so Hunter had to actually wait in the parking lot in the car, and I had to go into that appointment alone. And they ended up giving me a vaginal ultrasound because they wanted to get a really, really good look at the baby, my placenta, and the scar tissue around my C-section scar. They had the ultrasound tech come in, and she was looking at it, and I could tell from the mood in the room and just how we were talking and how somber things were, that things weren't looking good. Just my intuition told me, like, we're not gonna get good news today. And she actually called in one of the other doctors just to confirm what she was seeing on the ultrasound. And they actually turned it and showed me so that I could see and understand that it looked like there was growth from my placenta, not just into the scar tissue, but actually all the way through into my bladder. And that was absolutely terrifying as they started to tell me what that meant. The condition that this is called is placenta accreta, and it can be fatal for the mother. The reason that it can be fatal for the mother is because you can end up hemorrhaging and losing so much blood that you don't make it during delivery. That can also mean that you can hemorrhage prior to when you are full term and cause you to have a premature baby, which was, of course, my biggest fear. And Hunter's biggest fear was losing his wife or his child. And so this information, as you can tell, was so difficult to absorb. And the doctor asked me very gently how I felt about the size of my family. And I knew that he was gonna tell me that I needed to have a hysterectomy when I delivered Blakely. So when I left that appointment and got to the car, you know, Hunter got out of the car and he gave me a big hug and he just cried and said, "I'm so sorry, Rachel." And it kind of felt like all of the fears that we had about this pregnancy were kind of coming to life at that moment. And it was really, really scary that it was both of our lives that were on the line because of this information. This specialist was absolutely wonderful, but he did tell me that one of the best clinics in the entire United States was actually located in Salt Lake City. And so he wanted to transfer all of my care to the specific unit at the University of Utah Hospital, which is where Beckham was born. So I already felt so comfortable with that hospital. I feel like I owe them my life and my child's life already, so I trust them with everything I have. He transferred all of my care up to that specific clinic for me to continue working with them throughout the rest of my pregnancy. When I left that appointment, he gave me a few things that I needed to do. He told me that I could no longer exercise aside from walking. He also told me that I was on complete pelvic rest and that I just needed to be really, really careful and cautious if I saw any bleeding. And that if I saw any bleeding, I needed to immediately go to the emergency room. And of course, I just felt terrified. I was so afraid that something was gonna happen to my daughter. And I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but I really wasn't as concerned about myself. When I saw Hunter and his pain, that's when I worried about myself, just like I was worried about Blakely, but it was just impossible for me as a mother to be focused on the fact that I was at risk when I knew that my daughter was at risk. Even though it was my body that was having the issue and that I was at technically greater risk, because typically with placenta accreta, their hope is that the baby gets far enough along that the baby does well in the NICU. But I knew that even with our best case scenario, we were still probably looking at NICU time. And my only experience with the NICU was a baby that was dying, not necessarily thriving, until we were deep into our NICU experience. And so that scared the crap out of me. We of course followed these instructions perfectly when it came to pelvic rest and exercise until we were able to get into the specialist up at the University of Utah. There was a month-long waiting period, which my doctor told me was okay, and that as long as I was not seeing any bleeding, that I just needed to follow these instructions, and that once I entered the third trimester, they would be watching me on like a weekly basis to make sure that my placenta was not getting further and further attached to the scar tissue and my bladder. So now I'm gonna touch just a little bit more on like what placenta accreta actually is and what I was told it would entail for me. So I was told that with placenta accreta, that's accompanied with placenta previa. Placenta previa is when your placenta is covering the birth canal where the baby would of course come through for a vaginal birth. And so I automatically was going to have a C-section. Now I was actually already planning on opting for a C-section with my second because I had a really positive recovery with the C-section itself with Beckham. And I also feel like God was just mentally preparing me to have another C-section, in all honesty. And I was okay with that. I was at peace with having another one. So I didn't feel an intense loss when it came to not being able to deliver my baby vaginally. I was much more worried about when I was going to be delivering my baby because I was so concerned about having a premature baby again, of course. The other thing that they told me accompanied with the C-section would be a hysterectomy. The reason that the hysterectomy was necessary is because they wouldn't be able to remove the placenta without me hemorrhaging. This is where it becomes so incredibly dangerous for the mother. It's because not only can you hemorrhage before the child is born, but during the C-section and during the operation, you can lose so much blood. So they told me that when I went in to deliver Blakely, they would already have multiple liters of blood on hand, and that they would be prepared to give me a blood transfusion, and that they were prepared for me to go into the ICU at the time that I delivered her. We would both have a team of doctors that were ready to save our lives when I gave birth to her. That was really overwhelming. And I also really mourned for Hunter because of how much he'd already been through. And I knew that even though it was gonna be me experiencing that, you know, I wasn't gonna be conscious, but I knew that Hunter would be, and that he would be waiting to find out if both of the people he loved were okay. So it was difficult to not let that affect me so deeply. The next thing that they were concerned about was the fact that it was growing into my bladder. And in some instances, they do have to remove part or entirely your bladder, which I honestly felt like I couldn't even think about that at the time, because I didn't want to think about, you know, how that would affect my quality of life. And I didn't want to be focused on me. I only wanted to be focused on Blakely. And I think a lot of this just came from knowing how much I loved her. I already had Beckham, so Blakely immediately became equivalent. Like, she was my little girl, and I couldn't even function or process worrying about both of us. I let Hunter worry about both of us, and then I worried about Blakely, and I did everything that I could to try and keep her in the womb for as long as possible so that she would be as safe and as healthy as possible. As I mentioned, it was a 4-week waiting period until I was able to get into that specialist up at the U. Hunter and I were, of course, not skipping into this appointment. We were holding our breath. And this was another appointment where Hunter had to actually wait in the car when I went up to the doctor. I went up there and I did another, basically, anatomy scan. So every single appointment that I had from my anatomy scan on was like another anatomy scan. So I got a ton of ultrasounds to keep such a close eye on me and the baby. I was up there forever. After another anatomy scan is basically just what I'm gonna call it, but very in-depth, detailed, measured ultrasound. She took it to the MFM doctor, who is one of the best doctors in the entire country. Just incredible. I'm so grateful that I had him. And they put me in another room and told me that he was going to look at the results of this scan, and then he was going to come in and talk to me about what things were looking like. Well, I was in that room and time just was moving very slowly until I realized that I was waiting for a really, really long time. While he was looking at that scan, it started to take quite a while. And as the time went on, I was just getting more and more nervous, because I just thought, why isn't there like a clear answer? Like, is something wrong? And I started to kind of spiral. I just thought, am I gonna deliver my baby today? What is going on? I am so scared. And I was only 24 weeks. I was petrified that something was wrong, because I was barely past the age of viability when it comes to the NICU. I was just getting more and more nervous, and they actually had me switch rooms because I was waiting for so long. With the nurse that was switching me rooms, I actually walked past the MFM doctor, and he was on the phone with somebody looking at my ultrasound, saying, she has an extremely traumatic history with pregnancy. Her first barely made it, and that is all I heard. And I just panicked. I'm like, why is he on the phone with somebody? Who is he talking to? Is something wrong with my baby? I am just panicking, and it is taking forever for him to come in. And of course, I'm so incredibly grateful he's being so detailed. I'm just scared. I'm just spiraling. My husband's not even there with me. He's sitting in the parking lot, and I'm just texting him like, babe, he was on the phone with somebody. I don't know what's going on. And I was just like trying to keep it together. And then finally he came into the room and he sat down with me, and he said, I am so sorry that took so long. I actually had to take your results down to radiology just to make sure that I was looking at everything perfectly and I'm not about to make a mistake. And then he just looked me straight in the eyes and he said, from what I can see, not only does it look like you don't have placenta accreta, but it actually looks like your placenta has moved up and that you no longer have placenta previa. When he told me this, I just broke down and the tears of joy just flooded. And I was so happy. And I was just so incredibly grateful. And I knew, like in that moment, that I had to continue trusting God, and that when he tells me to do something, I do it and I look forward with faith. And I know that I'm human and that it's okay that I mourned what I thought I was experiencing and going through. And I also want to make it really clear that the first doctor wasn't incorrect, and this next doctor was incredibly talented and amazing. And I'm so grateful that I had both doctors, because I strongly believe that there were miracles being worked inside of my body in that 4-week time frame from the time that I saw the first MFM doctor to the second MFM doctor. And he told me that he wanted to treat me as a placenta accreta patient because of how high risk I was, and that the fact that my placenta was moved was phenomenal, but we of course didn't want to ignore the fact that it still was low lying, and we wanted to make sure that it completely cleared my birth canal and continued to move up as my belly got bigger. He told me he still wanted to see me, but that I could go home and that my heart could rest easy, and that he predicted that I was going to have a phenomenal birth experience. He also walked me through what my options were. He told me that I could still opt for a C-section, and that it was probably best that I plan on doing that because my placenta hadn't quite moving all the way past where it needed to be in order for me to deliver vaginally. And so he felt good that I felt good about delivering another baby via C-section. He also told me that how it looked right now, there was absolutely no need for a hysterectomy, and that I was going to be able to choose if I wanted to expand my family after Miss Blakely. And that was something that I obviously deeply desired to have a choice in. I really wanted to be able to choose instead of having that choice taken from me, as I'm sure you can understand. And so I was so grateful that I knew I didn't have to get a hysterectomy. And then he also took me off of pelvic rest, which made Hunter really happy. And so I skipped out of that appointment, and Hunter and I just like flew into each other's arms and cried tears of joy. And we went and got dinner, and we were just so excited. And we just spent the weeks after that thanking God for how incredible this beautiful miracle was, that it looked like I didn't have placenta accreta. So they continued to keep a really close eye on me throughout the remainder of my pregnancy. And they told me that sometimes with these ultrasounds, if I'm a very high risk patient, like I was because of where my placenta was lying and the fact that I had scar tissue and my previous pregnancy history, they wanted to have blood in the operating room waiting for me regardless if it looked like they were going to need it or not, because of the previous ultrasounds that they did where it did look like I had accreta. So there were some mixed opinions and mixed emotions, but I of course wanted to move forward with the most positive mindset that I could possibly have and expect everything to go well. I didn't, again, want to mourn something that hadn't happened yet. I was able to continue exercising at that point, but I went very, very lightly and just erred on the side of caution the entire time because I cared about one thing only, and that was my little girl. And from that point on, everything just continued. And then 31 weeks rolled around, and unfortunately, we all got very, very sick in my household. We all ended up getting the virus, and it hit me the hardest. Beckham was actually completely asymptomatic. Hunter has symptoms of having a slight cold, and I had an extremely high fever for multiple days in a row. The body aches that I had, Blakely was sitting on one of my ribs, and my body aches were so severe, it genuinely felt like my ribs were breaking every time I coughed. It was so incredibly horrible. And I was 31 weeks at that point. I was having ridiculously high fevers. It was very, very intense. I actually went to the hospital a couple times just to check on baby. I was fortunately not losing any breath or having any issues with my oxygen, but the high fever and body aches were very, very intense. As my sickness progressed and as I was in my quarantine period, Hunter and I kind of started to notice that although I was of course still eating well, that my belly started to actually look smaller. And this became very, very concerning for us because I was already carrying a little bit more on the smaller side, and it actually kind of looked like I was losing a little bit of roundness in my belly. And I could still feel Blakely kick, but it was something that we both kind of noticed and thought we should talk to a doctor and just be sure, because of course I wasn't able to go in for any checkups during this time frame when I was in quarantine. And so something that you might not know is actually if you get the sickness while you are pregnant, they actually do non-stress tests on the baby every single week until you deliver if you're in your 3rd trimester. So I qualified for that. I went in for a non-stress test after I was out of quarantine, and my sweet little angel was measuring small, and she also wasn't super reactive. They were having me drink juice and do all of these things to try and get her like wiggling around in there. And they told me that they were a little bit concerned, so they actually ended up sending me to the hospital. Of course, I was really scared and nervous, and at this point I was 34, 35 weeks, I believe. Blakely was pretty far along, but she was measuring really, really tiny. So I kind of had mixed emotions. Like, of course I was really nervous because I wanted to make it to 40 weeks. That was like my deepest desire. But I knew that she was way further along than Beckham was, and it was likely that everything would be okay if she was born. But I still just like really desired a full-term baby, of course. And so I tried to stay as faithful and positive as possible, and they sent me to the hospital that day, and everything actually ended up well. They did another extended non-stress test at the hospital, and Blakely ended up passing, meaning she gave them enough movement for them not to be concerned. And of course they were watching her heart rate the entire time, and everything looked good. So they went ahead and sent me home, and they just told me to, you know, continually pay attention for kicks and movement, which I did. The next week rolled around, and I went back in for my next non-stress test, and at this point I was 36.5 weeks along. During this non-stress test, the exact same thing happened. Miss Blakely did not want to move or have a party in my belly, but her heart rate did look good. But when they gave me juice and they would kind of like move my belly around to get her moving, there were really no spikes in her heart rate at all, and she just wasn't showing a lot of reaction. And so again, that concerned her, and I was still measuring very small. They actually ended up measuring my belly, and as you guys know, like when you're pregnant, from the bottom of your chest to the top of your pelvis, you should measure how many weeks you are along. And so I should have measured at 36 or 37, and she was measuring at 31. And so they were very, very concerned, and my doctor just said, you know, we really need to send you to the hospital because I'm not willing to take a chance for a stillborn. And that affected me. Needless to say, that absolutely terrified me. I went straight to the hospital, and they did another extended non-stress test, and my little one did not pass this one. And so they were monitoring her heart rate, and her heart rate was stable. So that was the one thing that was very positive, is it seemed like she was totally stable, but she was measuring so incredibly tiny. And so they actually sent me up to the U, because I did go to a hospital that was closer to my home just for the extended non-stress test. But they sent me up to the U because they told me it was very likely I would deliver my little girl that day. And so I was mentally preparing as we went up there. Hunter came and met me and brought a hospital bag, and we were, you know, ready to give birth. And when I got there, they did another like anatomy scan or like extended ultrasound, and they were able to see that she had dropped below the 10th percentile, and that qualifies for a diagnosis of Iugr, which is intrauterine growth restriction, meaning that she was not getting adequate nutrients in the womb. They also tested my umbilical cord and my placenta and the blood running through it and the nutrients running through it, and the blood flow looked good, my amniotic fluid looked good. There was quite literally like no explanation as to why she stopped growing, aside from the fact that I had extremely high fevers at 31 weeks, and that is exactly when she stopped growing. And so, you know, everyone can kind of come to their own conclusion on that, but high fevers are correlated with Iugr, and so we suspect that that's what happened. So they admitted me to the hospital, and they told me that they wanted to wait 2 days to deliver her because they wanted to give me a back-to-back steroid shot that had to be 24 hours apart. If you guys have seen my video with Mr. Beckham, you guys know that I got a steroid shot with him. And so I just felt, you know, really emotional about how things were going. And I was so grateful at how far along she was. So incredibly grateful. And I knew that she was gonna be okay. I knew that even if she spent time in the NICU, that I just needed to find strength and get through that, and that she was gonna be okay. And that was the only thing that mattered. And so I was like, yep, give me those steroid shots. And the first one hurt so incredibly bad. Oh my word, it hurt so bad. They accidentally hit a nerve. The first steroid shot was actually done at the previous hospital when she failed the non-stress test, because they knew that I was gonna deliver. And so they gave me the first steroid shot there so that I could deliver as soon as possible. Then they gave me the second steroid shot up at the U, and she did not hit a nerve. And so I was so terrified for the second one, and thank goodness she did not hit a nerve on this one, and oh, it didn't hurt nearly as bad. And so those steroid shots, I will tell you, they are like painful little suckers. But I ended up getting both steroid shots. So we were in the hospital on Friday and Saturday, and then Miss Blakely was born at 11:50 a.m. on October 11th of 2020. And that day was the absolute best day of my entire life, tied with the day that we got to bring Beckham home from the NICU. It was the most healing experience I have ever had in my entire life, and I am so grateful for that birth experience. And it's a day that I wish I could relive over and over and over again. In my next video, I am going to tell you guys all about my little girl's birth story so that you can hear all of those beautiful, amazing details, because I can see that I have been recording already for almost 40 minutes, so this video is going to be very long. But I'm going to be sharing her miraculous, incredible, beautiful, healing, wonderful birth story in my next video for you guys, and I cannot wait to share it. So thank you so incredibly much for joining me for today's video. I am so grateful for you guys. If you haven't yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss part 2. And I, of course, am so incredibly grateful if you have already chosen to subscribe to my channel and join our family. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.